The RMS Titanic, a name that echoes through history, a titan of the sea, a palace of dreams, and a frozen tomb. We know the stories of the rich and famous in their first-class suites. We know the captain, the band, the drama of the lifeboats. But history is vast, and the ocean is deep. Not all stories have been told. On a ship of over 2,000 souls, most were not millionaires or celebrities. They were the workers, the builders, the stokers in its fiery heart, the unseen. This is the story of one such passenger, a man whose name you won't find on any first-class ledger, but whose journey is a testament to the thousands of forgotten lives that were tied to the fate of the unsinkable ship. His name was Thomas McDermott. That's the name we'll give him, for his real one is lost to time, buried in faded employment records. He wasn't a passenger in the traditional sense. He was part of the ship's beating heart, a stoker. Born in the backstreets of Belfast, where the very skeleton of the Titanic was pieced together, he was a man forged in fire. For men like Thomas, the Titanic wasn't just a job. It was an escape. It was the promise of a steady wage and, more importantly, a one-way ticket to America. He wasn't chasing wealth. He was chasing a breath of fresh air, a life away from the coal dust and the grinding poverty of the old world. He had a wife, Mary, and a small daughter, little Aoife, whose cough was getting worse in the damp Belfast air. The money he'd send back from New York, he dreamed, would be their salvation. Life below decks was a world away from the gilded chandeliers and string quartets. It was a labyrinth of steel corridors, the air thick with the smell of oil and sweat. The boiler rooms were the ship's inferno. 159 furnaces devouring over 600 tons of coal a day. Thomas, alongside dozens of other men, worked in scorching heat, their bodies slick with a black mix of coal dust and perspiration. They were called the Black Gang. They shoveled, they sweated, they endured. They were the engine of the ship of dreams, yet they were completely invisible to the passengers above. Through the steel plates of the floor, they could sometimes feel the faint vibrations of the orchestra, a ghostly reminder of the other world they powered but could never join. On the second day at sea, April 11th, 1912, Thomas found a moment to escape. After a grueling shift, he navigated the crew's narrow stairwells, seeking fresh air. He found an unlikely spot, a small, deserted section of the third-class deck. The sun was brilliant, the sea a vast, impossible blue. It was more open space than he had ever seen in his life. For a few precious minutes, he wasn't a stoker. He was just a man, watching the endless horizon, dreaming of the life he would build. He saw families from Ireland, from Scandinavia, from the Levant, all gathered on the deck below him, their faces filled with the same hope that burned in his own heart. He clutched a small, worn photograph in his pocket, Mary and Aoife. This was all for them. But the Atlantic in April is a treacherous beast. By the fourth day, the temperature began to plummet. Seasoned sailors exchanged knowing, worried glances. The wireless room, the ship's electronic nerve center, was spitting out warnings from other vessels. Iceberg region. Large ice reported. These messages were passed to the bridge, but the Titanic, under pressure to make a grand, on-time arrival in New York, steamed on at a perilous 22 knots. Down in the boiler rooms, the men felt the change. The very vibration of the ship felt different in the colder water. An unspoken tension settled in the air, as thick as the coal smoke. They were ordered to maintain speed. The Black Gang did as they were told, feeding the insatiable furnaces, unaware they were powering their own race towards doom. It happened at 11:40 p.m., April 14th. For the passengers in their beds, it was a strange jolt, a peculiar shudder. But for Thomas McDermott in the heart of the ship, it was Armageddon. The starboard side of the Titanic, the side he was working on, scraped along the unseen mountain of ice. The sound was indescribable, a primal scream of tortured steel. The hull plates, made brittle by the freezing water, didn't just bend, they fractured. A brutal gush of the black, freezing Atlantic erupted into boiler room number 6. It wasn't a leak, it was an invasion. The water was instantly knee-deep, then waist-deep. Alarms shrieked, but they were almost drowned out by the roar of the ocean pouring into the ship's guts. Thomas and the others scrambled, fighting the surge, but it was like trying to fight the ocean itself. The order was given to shut down the furnaces, to vent the boilers to prevent a massive explosion. In the pitch-black, steam-filled chaos, these men performed their final duty. Covered in grime and now freezing water, they worked to save the ship, or at least to buy it time. Thomas knew, with a sickening certainty that this was no ordinary accident. The ship was listing, the angle of the floor plates shifting beneath his feet. He began the desperate climb out of the ship's belly. He was an unseen passenger, and now he faced an unseen death, trapped in the maze of corridors designed to keep the crew separate from the guests. He pushed past panicked men, his only thought now of the photograph in his pocket and the open sky. When Thomas finally emerged onto the open deck, it was a scene from a nightmare. The first-class passengers, still in their evening wear, were being calmly directed to the lifeboats. But on the lower decks, it was different. A controlled evacuation was descending into chaos. The sheer scale of the disaster was becoming clear. There were not enough lifeboats, not even for half the people on board. Flares were being fired into the empty, starry sky, cries for help swallowed by the infinite dark. Thomas saw the stark reality. The lifeboats were being launched half-empty. The orders were women and children first, but it was a rule that seemed to apply most stringently in first class. Here, in the clamor of third class, it was every soul for themselves. Thomas didn't try to force his way onto a lifeboat. Perhaps he knew it was hopeless. Perhaps he saw the terror in the eyes of others, and his own fight simply vanished. In the chaos near the stern, he saw a young boy, no older than 10, separated from his mother, weeping. The crowd was surging, the ship's angle growing steeper. In that moment, Thomas wasn't a stoker anymore. He was a father. He pushed through the crowd, scooped the boy up, and fought his way towards one of the last, chaotic attempts to load a collapsible boat. He found the boy's mother, shoved the child into her arms, and then stepped back. He saw the relief in her eyes, a final, fleeting human connection. He had saved a life, ensuring another family would not suffer the fate he knew was coming for his own. It was a final, unseen act of grace. The great ship's stern rose high into the air, silhouetted against the stars. The lights flickered one last time, then went out, plunging everyone into absolute darkness. Thomas held onto a railing, the deck now a near vertical wall. He held the photograph of Mary and Aoife, the paper already soaked. He closed his eyes. He didn't hear the screams of the 1,000 others around him. He heard the laughter of his daughter. And then, with a sound that survivors would say was like the earth tearing apart, the Titanic broke in two and began its final, 2-mile plunge to the bottom of the ocean. Thomas McDermott, the unseen passenger, went with it. Over 1,500 people were lost that night. Among them were the stokers, the engineers, the cooks, the stewards, the men and women who made the ship run. Their names may not be carved on grand memorials, but their stories are fused into the very iron of the wreck. The Titanic wasn't just a ship of dreams for the wealthy. It was a ship of desperate hope for the unseen. For every name we remember, 100 more, like Thomas's, are known only to the silent deep. Theirs is the true, tragic story of the Titanic.